Multiple theories emerged about the identity of a feral lady living on the Louisiana bayou during the late 1800s, but the mystery was never conclusively solved. Today on American Strangeness, the wild girl of Catahoula Parish. A wild girl was frequently encountered in the woods of Catahoula Parish, Louisiana, during the late 1880s and early 1890s. She is perfectly nude and has no shelter of any kind, but has survived several severe winters, one Louisiana newspaper described her in 1887. The girl was so fleet of foot that all efforts to capture her have failed, the paper said. Despite numerous sightings and a few disparate theories regarding her identity, the case was never solved, and the wild girl disappeared into Louisiana legend. Catahoula Parish had about 13,000 residents in 1890. Today, it's even less. The parish was formed in 1808, shortly after the Louisiana Purchase. The stomping grounds of the wild girl were described as the desert of Catahoula Parish, an area of 45,680 acres north and west of Bayou Funny Lewis, a name derived from the Choctaw words Fanny, squirrel, and Lusa, black, meaning Black Squirrel Bayou. Located on the western edge of Catahoula Parish, this section broke away as LaSalle Parish in 1910. The report set the scene. There are 3 roads running through it from Centerville, one to Columbia, one to Castor Springs, and one to Simmons Ferry at the head of Little River. There are no habitations on this vast tract of land, yet it is covered with a dense forest of spruce, of short-leaf pine, mixed with post oak, whitethorn huckleberry bushes, and sedge grass. In 1886, several families lived just south of this quote-unquote desert on the northern border of Funny Lewis Stream. One of these residents was Jack Francis, who had several children. That December, one of Francis's daughters, who was 14 or 15, ran into the house and declared that she had seen a wild girl while driving home the cows. The teen said the girl, who was naked and had long black hair, had broken a parsley haw bush and run away upon seeing her. The wild girl, it is claimed, has been repeatedly seen, and several times by persons on horseback, who pursued her at full speed, but her extraordinary fleetness enabled the strange creature to outstrip their horses and escape, stated a June 1887 news article in the New Orleans Daily Picayune. Mr. A. Dukes, who lived near White Sulphur Springs in Catahoula Parish, at this point offered theory number 1 about the wild girl's identity. A wretched and degraded white woman, quotes, named Madam Duck, used to tramp through the country with her 3 children. One, a 7-year-old girl, was pretty but had a club foot, for which Madam Duck often threatened to abandon her. Dukes soon afterward noticed Duck accompanied by only 2 children. He suspected that the woman had made good on her threat to abandon the child, who had managed to survive the miseries of the situation and was running wild in the forests and swamps. Tracks left by the girl showed one clubbed or otherwise deformed foot. How she achieved great speeds with the disability wasn't questioned. People in the countryside were planning to conduct a systematic search for the quote-unquote wild waif. In July 1888, about a year after the previous news report, the wild girl was sighted again in the Swilly neighborhood about 15 miles west of Harrisonburg in Catahoula Parish. Several groups claimed to have encountered her multiple times over the course of 3 weeks. Miss Swilly, her 2 sons and daughter-in-law, said they were not more than 30 or 40 steps from the girl. At one time she was seen catching a goose, then picked it up and carried it away with her. The wild girl was also seen by 2 of Mr. Taylor's grown sons. The witnesses all gave the same description of her and were of the opinion that she frequented the local waterways and subsisted mostly on fish. Based upon the last time the girl was seen with Madam Duck, the townspeople guessed she was between 12 to 14 years of age. The neighbors turned out several times en masse with the goal of rescuing the girl, but failed to capture her, only finding her tracks. J. Ellis, the source for the story, said he did not originally believe in the wild girl, but changed his opinion after so many citizens of unimpeachable veracity told him the same story. Soon after this article appeared in the Daily Picayune, Funny Lewis resident J.R. Adams wrote the paper to declare the wild girl a probable creature of the imagination. Adams lived within 2 miles of the Francis family, and Lou, as she was called, the girl who first reported the wild girl, was his wife's niece. Lou was actually between 10 and 12 years old, not a teenager. Adams confirmed that the whole neighborhood searched fruitlessly for the lost child, only finding the same tracks Lou had discovered near her father's house. Adams wrote, "Of course, all this excited neighbor after neighbor, and on all sides would come some unreasonable story, such as men seeing and chasing on horseback, dogs running it, tracks all over the woods for miles away, child seen at gates in snowstorms, etc., every one of them resembling impossibility. Where it is said the child was first seen, there is absolutely nothing to subsist on at that time, fall and winter. The clubfoot signifies that the little waif had lost a foot during its wanderings. What an absurdity! It is about all we can do to make a living in this country with all the advantage of our little civilization in both feet, with houses and clothes and parental care added." Some local women who desperately wanted to help the lost girl told Adams and others that they were cruel not to believe the story. The search party, unsuccessful, returned to the Francis home for lunch. Lou and her sister were sent outside to gather firewood, but soon came back and reported fresh tracks. Adams wrote, "Upon this news, one of the ladies, Miss Emily Cockerham, had her faith shaken and went out and pretended search again, but was on the alert watching Lou, and finally saw her step 1 foot down into a little ravine or muddy place and make a track. Then turning to the parties behind said, 'Aunt Emily, I have found another track.'" The truthfulness of this statement can be verified by Miss Cockerham's oath. Since this, nothing more has been seen or heard of the lost child. I do not pretend to say but that Mr. J.C. Francis honestly believes his child saw a wild girl. Adams said he was also acquainted with Duck. She passed by his place often and still had all her children intact, both before and since the rumor of the wild girl began. Captain M. Dempsey, who had urged townspeople to conduct a search for the unfortunate girl on July 4, 1887, was a nice man with a generous heart who had nonetheless been taken in by the rumors, said Adams. Meanwhile, he learned from the brother of Miss Swilly that the family had heard something but was too timid to investigate. The story then became exaggerated to include more tracks and the presence of the wild girl. Ellis had then reported the tale, building upon the previous summer's news coverage. "I have been so disgusted with this stuff, I feel it my duty to write what I have written," Adams explained. Despite this attempt at a thorough debunking, the wild girl was seen again just 1 week later. During the 3rd week of July 1888, 2 men from Alexandria, Louisiana, were walking through Trinity near Hemp's Creek when they stumbled upon one of the most ferocious-looking beings that the human eye was ever cast upon. The men at first thought the girl was on a jaunt through the woods and not far from home. They stopped to ask her a few questions, but could not get nearer than 50 feet. Fleet as a deer, she cleared a large root 7 feet high as she fled. Had the men been on horseback, they say it would still have been almost impossible to capture her. They thought she could conquer any 3 men in the neighborhood and were terrified to sleep near the woods for fear of encountering the girl again. The men said the girl appeared to be about 16 and spoke only gibberish. She was clothed in nothing but what nature gave her. The girl had immense eyes and brown hair that hung down to her waist. She stood about 4'6" and weighed about 125 or 140 pounds, with no surplus flesh, quotes. Her arms were long, brawny, and muscular. She walked with a limp, but they could not get near enough to distinguish whether she had a deformed foot. The girl carried an old knife about 8 inches long. A dead calf found in the neighborhood with pieces cut out was suspected to be her handiwork. A great many who have heretofore doubted the existence of this girl are now more convinced that it is a truth, the information coming as it did from 2 men who had never been in the parish before, reported the Trinity Herald. The country is aroused. A committee of 15 men with provisions for 2 weeks was to be organized to capture her. The posse was apparently unsuccessful, as another witness claimed to have run into the wild girl in September near the mouth of Little River. She did not appear vicious and wasn't carrying her knife, seemingly engaged in fishing or goose hunting. In late September, the wild girl was seen by Captain J. M. Ball, a large planter near Alexandria, John C. Golden, a leading scenic artist and house and sign painter, M.W. Calvert, a city marshal, and Charles Goldenberg, bookkeeper at the Lavino lumber yard. The quartet were fishing at Gum Springs on Clear Creek, about 18 miles from Alexandria and Grant Parish near the line of Rapides and Catahoula parishes. Ball heard squealing and a ruckus among their pigs and asked Golden to accompany him to investigate. They soon discovered a woman standing on a log with a young pig she had killed in one hand and a short knife in the other, intent on avoiding the enraged adult hogs around her. When she first saw the two gentlemen at about 30 yards off, she did not seem to be half as much afraid as they were. Ball and Golden backed away, keeping their eyes on the wild girl. When the men were far enough, she absconded into the bushes with the pig she had killed. Ball said she was a naked white female, appeared to weigh about 140 pounds, and was as active as a cat. She was covered with hair varying in great lengths in different parts of her, said Ball. In a separate article that ran the same day, Ball further explained that the girl had a brushy, matted head of hair and long hair on her feet and hands. Ball said he would be willing to make an affidavit as to the truth of his testimony. Calvert and Goldenberg said they both examined the tracks of the woman and the spilled blood of the pig, and had never seen two men more frightened. The wild girl became the town talk in Alexandria once Daily Picayune readers read about the incident on Clear Creek. R.W. Bringhurst, parish surveyor, thus proposed theory number 2 about the wild girl's origins. She might be the daughter of the late Captain Dave Wilson, who lived for several years on the east bank of Flagon Creek, where it empties into Little River. Wilson kept a woodyard on the river. In 1853 or 1854, Wilson sent his daughter, aged 6 or 7, alone to a neighbor's house. She did not return, and after diligent searching, it was considered that she had been devoured by some wild beast or alligator and was given up as lost. Bringhurst learned of the tragedy from Wilson himself when visiting his house a few days later. The woman seen by Captain Ball the previous Monday was only 3 or 4 miles from the old Wilson home. Ball had estimated the wild girl was about 35, making her more accurately a wild woman, placing her in the same age range of Wilson's daughter had she somehow survived. Bringhurst said that Ball was unaware of the Wilson girl and her disappearance. The Picayune said it contacted a celebrated detective in Marshall, Texas, to make arrangements for him to travel to Catahoula Parish with his hound dogs and lead a posse of citizens in search of a solution to the mystery once and for all. That October, Francis paid a pleasant visit to the office of the Town Talk newspaper in Alexandria, accompanied by his daughters, Mrs. Price and Alice Francis. Alice was the young lady who, 2 years earlier, had seen the wild girl. It is unclear if she was nicknamed Lou, as Adams had claimed. Alice informed a journalist that she had indeed seen the creature in quotes, and her description tallied with Ball's account from a few weeks earlier. Francis informed the paper that he and neighbors had tracked the wild girl for miles, through dense and almost impregnable places, but could never catch her. He did find a place in the top of a tree where she slept at night. Long before the wild girl was first seen, neighbors had been losing all their young pigs and could not account for it. The wild girl had been killing and eating them, Francis explained. On October 26th, the Lake Charles Echo and Calcasieu Parish published theory number 3 about the wild girl's origins, at least as it pertained to the encounter at Clear Creek. A few shrewd businessmen from Alexandria, presumably Ball, Calvert, and Goldenberg, took note of all the press the wild girl of Catahoula was receiving. They conceived the idea that an illustration of her might make an attractive mascot for patent medicine advertisements, perhaps even taking the place of the alligator on matchboxes and patent medicine almanacs. They enlisted Golden, one of the finest artists in the state, they said, who joined them on their fishing excursion to Gum Springs as the setup to the tale. Upon returning to Alexandria, they told their made-up story to the press in order to generate free advertising. Golden then secluded himself to work on the painting. This seems to be the most plausible story yet related, the paper said. After so much free advertising on the subject, certainly a picture of the description above written, protected by a patent, ought to bring big money. The wild girl with a knife in one hand and a pig in the other would certainly be a great relief to the eye, especially to the blizzard-stricken immigrant who has been educated, as it were, to the belief that Louisiana was literally alive with alligators. The regional press was divided on the reality of the wild girl. The Bungie Blade complained, "Why is it that an intelligent press, whose duty it is to teach truth and educate the people, will parade such nonsense before their readers? It is more than we can divine." The papers must be hard-pressed for news items to even allow themselves to entertain for an instant any such bosh. Don't cram us with myths any longer. One newspaper declared the idea that a child could survive for so long in the wild too revolting and silly for a plausible yarn. Another paper reminded readers of a 50-year-old woman in Rapides who, in 1875, had been trapped in the swamps due to overflow from the Red River. Hunters passing through in September 1876, after the flooding receded and the swamp dried, were surprised to find the barefoot tracks of a woman along the stream banks. It caused great excitement in the vicinity. That fall, 2 men riding through the swamp found the woman, nude but for a string around her waist from which hung the remains of a squirrel she had killed. She had survived by creating a log raft and living on raw frogs, crayfish, and anything she could find. Now, if a woman who never perhaps camped out before could go through a winter and at least 4 months high water on a raft, with nothing but crayfish to support life, I can see no reason why we should doubt there being a wild girl living on terra firma in the hills, and who can occasionally enjoy a pig on a log, argued the paper. Another reporter insisted that Ball and Golden were gentlemen of well-known veracity who would not tell such a yarn and stick to it so long if it really had no foundation. Golden reinforced that he really did see the wild girl, who he described as being of medium height, well-formed and very active. Her body was covered with long brown hair. The wild girl was seen again on a Friday afternoon in November about 3 miles west of Black Gum Springs and 12 miles from Trinity. A group of witnesses gave chase but came to a creek, which the girl jumped in and swam across to the opposite shore, cutting off further pursuit. At one time we thought this a myth, but are now becoming convinced that such a thing as a wild girl in Catahoula is a reality, wrote the Trinity Herald. The Meridional newspaper of Abbeville, Louisiana, printed theory number 4 about the wild girl's identity on November 17th. In 1873, Mr. McDonald, a resident of Calcasieu Parish, left Louisiana to establish himself in Texas and was never heard from again. It was generally believed that he had drowned in a marsh adjoining the parish. His only companion was his 7-year-old daughter, who was assumed to have perished on the journey. However, it was soon reported that a wild white child in a nude condition had been seen in the neighborhood of Dr. Mims' residence. The child, it would seem, was ignorant of the existence of any being of its kind, and had partaken of the wild nature that surrounded her, for, on the appearance of the person who saw her, she ran in the opposite direction, pursued by his dogs, which he called off, when she disappeared and has never been heard of since in that section. Frequently since that epoch, the woods in that section have been searched by experienced swampers. The most secret recesses were hunted, but all efforts have proven of no avail whatever. J.D. Stanfield, a resident of Pinchburg in Calcasieu Parish, offered some support for this theory in a letter published in the Town Talk on January 19, 1889. Stanfield was among the party that fruitlessly searched for the wild girl reported near the residence of Dr. L.N. Mims in western Calcasieu, which he said occurred in the spring of 1874. A 10-year-old boy, the son of William Lyons, had seen the wild girl. A few days later, the daughter of Joe Harden said she saw a little white girl run through an old field about 2 miles from where the Lyons boy had spotted her. The recent connection drawn between the wild girl and the vanished McDonald reminded Stanfield of an incident from February 1874. He and a few boys had headed down a river in Calcasieu Parish for the purpose of deadening, in other words, calling undesirable cypress timber. About 5 miles downriver and 2 or 3 miles from the nearest settlement, they discovered the body of a man that had drifted against a log projecting from the west bank of the river. They returned with a large group of citizens, including Dr. Mims. The group removed the corpse from the water and examined it, but found no marks of violence. They buried the body the best they could and sent a signed report to the Lake Charles Echo. The closest post officer was 40 miles away in Lake Charles. Whether this was the man McDonald or not, I cannot say. He was not recognized by any of the jury of inquest. It is only recently that I heard of McDonald's disappearance, wrote Stanfield. How the body of the man spoken of ever got where it was found has always been a mystery to this settlement. It must have been 2 or 3 months after the body was found and buried, when the child was said to have been seen by Mr. Lyons' boy. I do not believe a child could go wild and live on what it could catch in the woods, but if it is so, I would like to see it proved. According to street gossip reported in the Town Talk on January 26, 1889, the wild girl had been captured, but not until after she had killed 6 dogs and a man. In spite of this previous evocative yet likely spurious account, the Daily Picayune reported another appearance of the wild girl, this time in Pineville in its June 21, 1890 edition. Yesterday, Jay Hartner, one of Pineville's prominent merchants, and his daughter Alice, aged 16 years, were in one buggy, and Emmett Walker, a merchant of Fishville, and Ms. Jenny Hamilton, also of Fishville, in another buggy, were coming from Fishville to Pineville. Yeesh. When they arrived within about 8 miles of Pineville, they saw a white female, aged apparently about 30 years, weighing about 125 pounds, about 5 feet high near the road. She was dressed in a faded homespun dress and barefooted. As soon as the wild woman saw them, she retraced her steps at right angles with the road, at a speed all say they never saw a human being run at. On reaching about 300 yards, she stepped behind a tree, but as soon as the buggy stopped, she started to run again, and they could all see her for about a half-mile stretch. The two gentlemen and one of the ladies were interviewed separately by the Picayune's correspondent, and all gave about the same account. It is proposed by our citizens to organize a party and attempt to capture the wild girl of Catahoula, the paper said. However, the town talk soon doused reality on this latest claim, stating that this wild girl was actually old Miss Smith's grandchild, a mute little girl who became lost and ran in fear from the strangers she saw coming up the creek. How the witnesses mistook a child for a 30-year-old woman is anybody's guess. The wild girl of Catahoula is out again this season. She has no new dress and takes to the woods, which appears to be full of her, wrote the amused Daily Picayune on July 10, 1891. Wild girl sightings appear to have died off at this point, although she lived on in local legend. Louisiana papers recounted the old tales periodically over the next 100 years. In a 1940 article, the son of little Alice Hartner of Pineville, by then Miss C.F. Crockett of Alexandria, had supplied the Town Talk editor with a presumably yellowing clip of his mother's sighting of the wild girl in 1890. The wild girl accounts are reminiscent of European traditions of wild men of the woods, humans who fled society to live as hermits in the wilderness and ultimately regressed into an animal-like state, foraging for food and growing a thick coat of hair over their bodies. Feral children who lived like animals in the woods and lacked human language skills were also a motif of European folklore, although actual accounts were documented starting in the 1600s. Settlers carried stories of wild people to the Americas, and 19th century newspaper accounts of these strange and terrifying individuals living in the untamed wilderness were prevalent. Many of the news articles described eccentric loners living on the edge of society, while others depicted Sasquatch-like creatures. A number of these wild men existed somewhere in between, still human but covered with hair and possessed of enormous strength and agility. Some of the wild girl sightings fit this pattern, describing to her superhuman athletic abilities and long hair covering her hands and feet or entire body. The wild girl of Catahoula persisted in Louisiana news columns for 5 years, with healthy debate and several witnesses coming forward. It seems unlikely to have been a straight-out hoax. Could she have been real? One or more of a number of missing girls who managed against all odds to survive amidst the parish's wetlands and woodlands? Or did it all begin with one little girl's imagination, spinning out into a regional legend that at times reached mass hysteria? The truth, whatever it may be, lies submerged in the murkiness of the Louisiana bayou.